Welcome to China Manufacturing Decoded from Sofeast, the podcast where we take you through some of the major topics facing importers and manufacturers in China today.
Hello everybody, this is Renaud and Anjoran, your host today, and welcome to another episode of the China Manufacturing Decoded podcast. Today my guest is Rico Ngoma. I've known him for probably 6-7 years. I think I met him in Shenzhen in an event. I'm not sure, I remember which one, and I've seen him over the years. He has a sourcing agency in Guangzhou. Is that correct? Maybe, hi Rico, maybe you can introduce yourself and what you do.
Hey Renaud, thanks for having me on the show. I think we met the first time. Like we spoke before because I had you on my podcast early when we launched because I was using your inspection company at the time, and I was also following your blog. So it just kind of made sense to me. I was like, if you want to interview somebody about QC, then contact Renaud, and then that would have been end of 2015, and then I think we met physically at the Cross Border Summit in 2016.
All right, that was it. Yes, correct.
Yeah, so I think that was the first time we actually met. And so I'm the CEO of SourceFinda Asia. We are a manufacturing consulting company based in Guangzhou. Our main office is in Guangzhou. We also have some installations in other parts of China, like most of southern China, but also in northern China as well. And we specialize in basically finding high quality suppliers, which means we don't necessarily have, a specific product that we always work with. Of course, one of our main clients is in the CrossFit space, so exercise equipment, CrossFit equipment. But we've done, injection molding, watches, electronics. We've touched on a lot of different products.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And we're speaking today actually because you and your team put together a digital summit, right? SourceFinda Asia Digital Summit. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about it. Who is the intended audience and where they can find it?
Yeah, so it's sfadigitalsummit.com. So the idea was, I wanted to launch a manufacturing course, or actually one of my friends told me I shouldn't call it a course. I wanted to launch a manufacturing program for a while. Like it's been a few years I'd been thinking about it, just because how there's a lot of e-commerce programs around Amazon and selling on e-commerce platforms, but there isn't too many people that are actually manufacturing, experts or that work in the manufacturing space specifically that had programs. So, I decided to put that together, especially during the last year and a half with COVID. The normal side of the business slowed down a little bit, so I had more time to think about this. And then also in general, I understood from, a lot of the startups and first-time entrepreneurs and small businesses that they couldn't afford to pay for our consultation services. So it made more sense to me to sort of put together a manufacturing program. And then how do I launch that program was the next question. So originally I thought I was going to do a webinar, and I interviewed somebody that gave me the idea of putting together a digital summit and basically, bringing together a lot of my network and having everybody do presentations on their areas. And that's how the concept came about. So, the summit itself is free. So sfadigitalsummit.com is where you go to sign up for it. You just have to submit your name and email address, and it's a free digital summit. I think we have a little bit over 16 different presenters, and covering all topics from, how do you build an audience, how you do market research, validation, all the way up to how you actually sell the product with the manufacturing and QC and design for manufacturing, which you did a presentation on
Right.
in between.
So okay, so that actually that I looked at the list of topics on the web page, and actually what I would suggest for today is to go through the topics that are related to manufacturing, like from vetting the supplier all the way to shipping, and just to cover them from the angle of I'm a new company, I'm setting up a new company somewhere in it could be in Europe, in North America, in other places. I'm going to buy some products from an Asian supplier. I already know what kind of product, but so we're going to skip all the looking for the right product and things like that. I already have an idea what market, so we're going to skip all the market research topics and things like that. But I want to get started. I want to get the manufacturing underway. I want to get the products in my hand, but I want to do everything, all of this on a small budget, because as you say, the target audience is people who may not want or may not be able to pay for consulting fees. So I want to do all of this on a relatively low budget. Okay, so let's go through the topics. And the first one would be okay, if you want to develop a new product, and how can you do that on a small budget, right? A lot of people in this case usually start with an existing product off the shelf, right? Just because this way they can get started selling it to a certain market, get to know that market, get to know how to distribute, and without having to do any investment in design. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. No, I mean, typically when clients come to me who want to create an original design and they don't have, a big enough budget for it, I typically would tell them not to do it, just because it's hard to really calculate the expenses before you actually start working on the project. It's a new product. You're dealing with a lot of different variables with suppliers and molds and things like this, where you might have to make multiple prototypes. The prototypes could be expensive. Like, there's so many things that you just don't know. So it's a little bit better to, if you don't have the budget for it, or you're working on a very tight budget, it's a little bit better to start off with pre-existing products, maybe with some small changes to the product. Or try to go into crowdfunding. But then again, crowdfunding is not what it used to be, right? So you have to be aware of, like, you're gonna spend a lot of money before you actually even launch your your campaign. Need to have
the prototype of your unique product, usually, or at least something that looks like a prototype. On Indiegogo, Kickstarter, you have to have a prototype, and then you have to pay to get a nice campaign. So maybe you're a digital marketing expert and you can do a lot of the photo shooting, maybe even some of the videos and things like that yourself, but most people are not in that case. So it costs them $10,000-$20,000 to get the nice campaign all set up, right? That doesn't
I mean, it's interesting, because it's like, I was talking to my business partner, Mike Sherhorn, and his nickname is China Mike, and he had a couple of crowdfunding campaigns back in the day, like I would say 2011-ish, when it was really early. And these were 6-figure campaigns, right?
Wow.
And that time period, I mean, they would spend, a couple $1,000s and then have a 6-figure campaign.
Wow.
But now I was talking to other people that have gone through crowdfunding campaigns in recent times, and they're spending high 5 figures to barely make 6 figures, right? Like,
right.
You're spending $70,000 to make 90,000 or 80,000 to make 100,000, and then you have your manufacturing costs, and the reason is just because it's a much more competitive market than it used to be. you have way more campaigns being launched at the same time. You have way more expenses in terms of the marketing, the videos, the graphics, the websites, all that kind of stuff. And then even again the manufacturing costs, like you mentioned. Yeah, the platforms are more strict than they were before because people were scamming before, right? Like they would launch a product and not actually have the product. So now, platforms like Kickstarter require you to have your prototype already produced, and that takes time and expenses before you launch.
Right. Yes. No. Exactly. And Facebook ads and similar ads are more expensive. Yes.
Yeah. Also Facebook ads. Yeah. Exactly. Even the sort of Facebook ad campaigns are more expensive than they used to be, just because again it's more competitive. So
yeah, the bar is much higher. So if you want to do it for a lot of visibility, that might make sense, but you might not actually make any margin on it. So be aware of it.
Yeah.
So to get back to that, I mentioned that because some people want to start buying something from, let's say, from China, and at the same time they want to develop their new product and everything. And if you have a low budget, that's too many unknowns. Usually what makes sense is what some people call a stair-step approach, where you start to pick something that you think you can sell to a certain market that and that you can reach rather inexpensively, and you basically distribute that product. Now maybe it might have your logo, might have maybe your packaging with your own artwork, your own color, but very minor differences. And then as you get to know your market and how to distribute to them, and as you get to also know your Chinese manufacturer, you might want to customize it further. You might even want to redevelop a totally new product from scratch that would be yours, rather than you distributing that manufacturer's product. But it's better to go at it step by step if you're really on a budget. First learn the basics of how to get products and move it to your market and sell it to your market, right? Okay, so supplier vetting. Good supplier, good results usually. Bad supplier, bad results pretty much all the time. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just so funny because, like, as a consultant, I have this conversation with clients all the time, and obviously, the biggest concern with clients is always price, right, and then quality, or quality and price. Like it's always like it goes hand in hand, and it's like, well, I want the best price, but I also want the best quality or the highest possible quality at that price. And I'm like, it doesn't work like that. Like if China is not Walmart. You have to, like, if you're going to go for the best quality, then you have to pay a certain price. And that price comes from, the research and the work that you do in terms of finding a good quality supplier. Right. And just in my experience, it's always been a situation where if we had, good conversations with the supplier early on, and they were giving us solid responses to the questions that we're asking, and they were also asking us questions and giving us some advice in terms of the product, whether it's materials or certain aspects of the design that they say, if you can change this, then it's going to be a little bit easier to manufacture. That's always been, it's always been a very good sign. And even just patience, actually, because we've had a few situations where, our clients were maybe a little bit difficult to deal with, and the factories were very patient and still, kind of wanted to go along with the order and was still willing to, make another prototype, for example, even though we made one and, there's some small changes that the client wanted to make, whereas a lot of other factories would say that change that you want to make is so small that, like, let's just place the order. and we'll give you a golden sample, and you'll be able to see the changes. So yeah, I think definitely 100%. Like if you can find a good supplier, if you have a good relationship with the supplier early on, then it bodes well for the rest of the order.
Yes. So again, on a small budget, basically, what can you do? So you can start from Alibaba or global sources. If you can't travel to Asia, but that's just the starting point, right? And people, so a few of the very common mistakes I see, as you mentioned, yeah, I want the best price, so I'm gonna ask, I found like 20 suppliers that make this whatever product that I want to buy, and I'm gonna ask them for their best price. So what do you think? Let's say these 20 guys, let's say 5 of them are actually quite good, and they get contacted by someone who says, "Oh, I want your rock bottom pricing," and da 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 da. Do you think they're even going to respond? Because if they're good, they have their long-term customers, they're busy, and they can probably charge a little bit of a premium. Are they going to respond? Usually not. So people who are going to respond are suppliers that are not so good, and it's going to be very inviting also to scammers if they're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So you end up either with a bad supplier or a scammer, right? So definitely not the way to start usually. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know. I think I mean it's difficult. Like when you're on a tight budget, it's really, really difficult to find that balance between price and quality, and I completely understand that. But you have to understand that there has to be some level of sacrifice, right? Like if you want to have a certain level of price, then you might have to sacrifice quality. If you want to have a certain level of quality, then you might have to sacrifice price, and
Right.
maybe on your first 1 or 2 orders you don't make as much money, but long term it's going to be more beneficial, because okay, so you save money on the first order, but then you have a ton of returns, right? Or you have to now start dealing with a factory, like you said, who you don't have a good relationship with, or you just have a lot of issues with that supplier. It ultimately ends up costing your business more in those situations. Whereas if you pay a little bit more, maybe you make less money at the beginning, but once you have satisfied customers and all that stuff, if you can do larger orders, then it works out and it's a much smoother process. Like we have case studies of like our clients that we worked with. Like there's actually I could send you a case study as well. It's actually a little bit of an ebook, which was a quality management system development that we did for a CrossFit equipment company. And it started off, the client found us through my YouTube channel, and I was doing a quality inspection for a CrossFit equipment company, a different company.
Oh, I see. Okay, yes.
Yeah. And the factory that I was at was the typical just bad, like the Laoban did not care about developing or improving at all his systems. He was outsourcing a lot of the stuff that they were doing. Right. So the quality was inconsistent and things like that. And these were things that you can only really learn when you go physically to the factory and start to understand what's going on. The reason why we worked with that particular factory is because my client was insistent on working with them because they had a nice website. So anyways, I made a YouTube video about it, and then this other CrossFit equipment company came and saw that, and they were working with the same supplier. And we basically went in and found out the same stuff, and we dug a little bit deeper, and the conclusion was that they had to change suppliers because they were losing money on returns versus like trying to develop this relationship with a supplier that doesn't want to improve. Right. So you really do have to take those things into consideration. And it was not a small company, the one that found us on YouTube. They were, in the high seven figures. And, they were stuck with the supplier just because it was, hey, from the beginning, this is who we've been dealing with. But they didn't really look at the aspects of you can find a higher quality supplier.
Right. Yes. No, yeah, and you're exactly right. Sometimes the conclusion is you just picked really the wrong supplier. These guys will never try to improve. These guys are not really trying to understand your quality standard. They're just trying to give you excuses to get your payment this time, get the stuff shipped out, and they don't even think of your next order. They don't care. So
No.
These are really big red flags. Apart from that, what can a company with really low budget, what can they do? I mean, they can look at some of the information on the directories like Alibaba, but being a gold supplier doesn't go very far. It doesn't really much, right?
And have you noticed that the Alibaba website has like removed a lot of those sort of classifications of gold and things like that for the suppliers? Like they've reduced, because they used to have so many different ones. They used to have like 3 or 4 different what do you call it, like certificates or whatever for the suppliers. I think right now it's only 1 or 2.
Oh, okay.
I think what you can do is there's a lot of resources. I mean, obviously your podcast, my podcast, like YouTube. There's a lot of YouTube videos. So I think you need to do your research if you're on a tight budget. Of course, in another situation, you can come and join our digital summit and the manufacturing program that we have, which in our manufacturing program, we take you step by step in terms of the supplier research process and, how we do it in terms of SourceFinda Asia as a company. So, I just feel like you can do a lot of research by yourself. There's a lot of free resources or resources that are relatively inexpensive. I think that's the first step. And then, there's also communities. Like we have Facebook groups and, forums with people with people that make products, that have been making products for years. I think you can jump into those places and ask questions.
Yeah, true. Yeah, no, good points. Yes, actually, on the podcast, China Manufacturing Decoded, we did like 10 episodes about China vetting. We really broke it down.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that they can learn and to do it themselves. That's for sure. Now, let's say
Renaud, I don't know if you've noticed this, but like for me, a lot of times like the clients I really enjoy talking to or working with are the ones that come from the podcast.
Oh yeah.
Because I think audio, especially because it's generally longer than the videos. I think audio, just people kind of pay attention more to what's being said because there isn't a visual aspect to it. So they tend to be a little bit more educated about the process as well.
They spend the time to learn and Yes, that's true. Now let's say, okay, you found a supplier that seems to be okay, or maybe 1, 2, 3 that seem to be okay. You're gonna move ahead with one. You need to set all the basic terms actually as early as possible, so that there's more, a higher likelihood that they accept what you're gonna tell them. So usually the payment terms, if you're a small buyer, there's gonna be relatively standard. If you can negotiate to pay the remainder after shipment, that's a plus, obviously. But if you're a small customer on the first order, that might be a little bit difficult. You could put certain things black and white. Maybe you used to be a lawyer, who knows? put some standard terms, black and white. Again, there's a lot of resources where you can find, what are the important terms to include and get them to sign it. It's always a plus anyway to clarify the expectations. What happens if they are 2 weeks late? What happens if they, if they ship a batch to you and there's 10% defective goods? What happens if they leak your confidential information? Certain things like this. It needs to be very, very clear. You might not want to go and sue them, even though, of course, making the contract enforceable is always a plus. But at least you can call them out on that, right? I guess you've done that a number of times, right? And it's always better when things are black and white on, from the beginning. There is going to be inspections during production, after production. Like, you have to let our inspectors come in. Sometimes some manufacturers actually try to push back on that, which is crazy, but they try, right?
I always tell my clients is like, when it comes to the contracts, the biggest thing that our suppliers usually push back on is the quality control standards.
Right.
Like, in terms of the aspect of what is a critical, minor, or major defect. We talk about the AQL level standards, and that's always the conversation that takes the longest in the contract. It's not about price. It's not about production time or anything like that. It's always, what is your expectation of quality and what is my expectation of quality. But yeah, you're right. Like, we've had to enforce a few times. And the fact that it is written in the contracts, and also typically, it's in Chinese and English. So one example was like one client of ours was making some swimming costumes, and it was not necessarily an original design in terms of the costume, but like the print on her costume was original, that she designed. And after we had done the first order, she, I guess, was browsing the supplier's website, and she came across her design, and it was ready to purchase on the site.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we had a non-disclosure agreement with the supplier, and our contract as well said they couldn't sell the product to other people. So we just contacted them and said, hey, see this clause, and they took it down. So, well, it's good. I mean, of course, you could have other suppliers that might not care, but that's also when it goes back to our conversation about finding good suppliers, right? Like,
Definitely.
Yeah. So the suppliers that care maybe a little bit about long-term stuff, I mean, they'll still maybe try something that is not is outside of what the working relationship was supposed to be. But when you point it out and you have an agreement and something to follow that's written down, a lot of times most of the time they'll actually take it down or they'll follow.
Yeah, and they know it's a problem, because in that specific case with the special, the custom print on the costume, some factories would just say, oh, but you're based in the UK. Usually our other customers in that case would tell us there's no problem to sell it to Australia.
Yeah.
You've heard that, right? So,
yeah, of course. Yeah, no, it's funny. It's funny, and it's just like, well, but at the end of the day, it's like, well, how do you know I'm not trying to expand to Australia? Like, that's the problem with those situations. But it's good to have the agreements in place, even though you might not necessarily be pursuing it aggressively, in the court.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said quality control is often something that they try to push back on, especially when it's specific. So something that a lot of people, they buy for the first time, and they really don't understand that it's on them to be specific. It's on them to design the process of the approval. So, for example, the costume, how do you make sure that you get exactly the right material and accessories? And then when it's dyed, it's exactly the right color that you want within a very tight tolerance. And the sizes are okay and all these kind of things. So you could just tell your your supplier, hey, yeah, just oh, you already know the sizes in North America, right? So yeah, we just want like 6-year-old, 8-year-old, 10-year-old, and yeah, right. And then you don't try to check it and approve it before production. I mean that is a recipe for disaster, because then if everything is 1 or 2 sizes too small, what can you say? You cannot say anything actually, because you never approved any samples for sizes, or if there's so many issues with that can pop up, obviously, but you need to design your approval process, and then because even if we say like relatively off-the-shelf product, that costume, as you say, maybe they already had the pattern and they already knew what workmanship it would be, but the colors and the print and everything are a bit different. Maybe the sizes need to be reapproved. So very often there are approvals, for packaging. Typically, you need to approve things and keep that as a standard, and you need to think, as you mentioned, of the potential defects. What is going to be a critical defect? If I find one of these, the whole shipment is going to be blocked. You're going to have to recheck 100% of the products, and you're going to have to pay for the reinspection. So when they start to see these sort of things in a very specific way, documented, that they have to approve, that's when they start to think, hey, this is for real. These guys might just block a shipment and be very painful. So that's when they start to discuss. And actually, that discussion is very, very important. It should take place, because if you send them something very specific and they say, okay, yeah, okay, send it back to you, it might be the salesperson who just wants her commission and wants to get things, underway, and they don't care. They say, okay, it's fine. And the people in production and quality haven't even seen it, right? Same thing for contracts.
Yeah, and that's a really good point as well, in terms of the salesperson, right? Because a lot of times you're talking to the salesperson, and the salesperson doesn't have the same level of expertise as the actual production management or the engineers that would maybe understand these issues. Right. And the salesperson is just trying to push the order and finish it just to get their commission. So that's something that we always kind of try to mention as well with clients who then work with factories directly, or if we're dealing with a factory and we have some issues, we try to get a second contact, maybe try to get the engineer or production manager or someone like that who has more experience, that has more decision-making power. Because a lot of issues have been fixed by just not dealing with the salesperson.
Right.
So it's quite a few numbers. Yeah.
That's so true. And then sometimes you get lucky and you get a really experienced one who, as you said, will ask some questions, will say, well, usually other clients, the other customers run into these kind of issues, and then they did that to prevent it, and you're really lucky. But if they see you as, this customer looks kind of cheap, it's the first time, so the order is not large, whatever, they give you the junior salesperson with very minimal experience. I mean, that's a risk. Happens quite a bit. And then nobody's managing the project. Nobody's really aware of the risks or pointing to the risks and challenges. And that's really an issue. So vetting the supplier, getting back to that stage, is so important. Making sure that you have the contact of maybe the sales manager or someone with experience that you can communicate with for certain topics. It's really a plus, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So definitely, I think the big takeaway there would just be like, get a second point of contact. If you can deal with somebody who's a little bit more senior, it makes it much easier.
Oh yeah, definitely. Now, okay, so let's say you found a supplier, agreed on the terms, everything's clear, they know sort of the roadmap to get your payments and to get the shipment and get everything validated. You're not on site. Do you just tell them, okay, yeah, here's the first payment, okay to start production, tell me when it's finished. Which a lot of people do, right?
Yeah.
Would you just say that and just trust that, hey, it's fine? They will tell me if something goes wrong.
Well, yeah. I mean, typically what we do is like we first of all we want to do an inspection of the facilities even before we start the order. So even if it was a product that was pre-existing and we looked at the samples and stuff like that, we still want to go physically to the supplier, sit down with them face to face, let them know that we're real, and also just understand what their actual facilities look like and how they operate. And then, as we already talked about quite a bit, the contract, a lot of times we end up negotiating the contract on those visits. But yeah, beyond that, I mean, you have to be active in your communication. You have to be asking them for updates. You have to be scheduling inspections. I think if it's an original product, then we typically like to do an inspection during production, and then at the end of production. If it's a pre-existing product, then you schedule the production at the end of the inspection at the end of production. But besides that, even just asking, your salesperson or whoever it is that you're talking to at the factory to go and check what's going on in production and send you pictures and just get general updates on the production process, I think is extremely important. It also is one of those things where, because a lot of clients don't do that, if you're a more active client, then you basically just have more people paying attention to
definitely
your production. Like they will take you a little bit more seriously.
Yeah, because again, as I mentioned, you have to assume that nobody is managing your order. It's they don't have like project managers or things like that. You would think the salesperson does that, but the salesperson is just going to follow up on the payments to get her commission. Is just going to respond to your questions, but not be very proactive usually, and she's going to spend her time waiting for other inquiries from Alibaba or wherever they are advertising, and following up as fast as she can to get the next customer and the next customer. That's the reality. So yeah, if you're far away, you can come. You have a low budget. I mean, if you can't even do an inspection of production, don't buy from Asia, I would say. Don't buy from Asia. It's really like something you can't skip. If you cannot run some kind of background check on the supplier, well, there are ways you can gather some information on different directories. You can talk to them. You can reduce the risk. If you don't go on site, I mean, some people, call the salesperson and say, okay, where are you? Turn the video on right now. Okay, show me the factory. Go to the shop floor, to see if they are at the factory. But this is, I don't think they can really have an idea about, the quality systems in place and what the processes are and what kind of other products they make, and have a look at, the other brands maybe that put their production there and things like that. So if you can't send someone to the factory, it is, and I can say it with certainty, if you do some kind of factory audit before you work with a supplier, this is correlated with better results later on during the product inspections. We've run the numbers based on our database, what we did for our clients. There is a strong correlation coming out very clearly, right? So you're just asking for trouble. Basically, you multiply your risks if you don't send someone to the factory to see what's going on, to see if they're real, to see if they're really making this kind of products, or if it's going to be all subcontracted, obviously, right? If they're making some very different categories of products, right? just last week I heard a crazy story about a factory making parts for aerospace, and their main activities was making washing machines, So, I mean, this is really extreme, really crazy, but sometimes you get into this kind of situation and you're like, what the heck? I mean, is this going to be made here? But do you even know something about that, that product line, or are you just jumping on every opportunity and you don't really know what you're doing, right?
Yeah. And actually something you just mentioned, which made me think of this is you have to be really careful about which product you select to make, right? If you're on a tighter budget. So, if you're going to make something that has a lot of technology into it and you have a tight budget, it doesn't really make sense because, technology is going to involve issues happening and things don't work immediately, and, multiple prototypes and bringing on technical expertise to figure out why this product isn't working and things like that. So I think it's that's another big.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So certifications also probably more.
Certifications as well. I mean, we had a client recently who was making a bag that had some sort of IoT lock to it.
Yes.
And, it was one of those situations where, there was multiple suppliers. There was a supplier for the bag and there was a supplier for the lock. And, the lock itself had multiple issues because it was new, and so it was something that we had to work through for quite a while. And the client started to feel pressure financially. And it just goes to one of those, the point that I was saying is like, you have to make sure it's like, if it's a technological product or something that is going to be expensive to produce, maybe take a second guess or look at different products if you don't, have a good budget for it.
Correct. Yeah, good point. And that also leads us to the next topic about compliance. If you buy anything that is for children, anything in contact with food, anything with electronics, anything, all of these come with their own compliance regulations. I mean, you're going to have to do more, to pay more attention and probably have more of a budget for compliance.
Yeah.
Especially if you pick off-the-shelf products and you don't know where the materials come from and everything, then you might have to do a lot of testing. And if you are on a small budget, that might be a killer, right? So keep that in mind. You will probably have to. You definitely will have to be aware. That's the first thing I would say. Aware of the compliance requirements in the market where you're going to sell the product. And I see that Frederick from compliancegate.com is part of, is one of the speakers in the summit. They have a neat tool about that. But really, you should be aware, right? What are the regulations, what the directives, the whatever, and what exactly does that mean? What do I have to do in terms of labeling even, and maybe declaration of conformity and things like that, and how, what are the risks, if some of the materials, maybe I should pay for a chemical analysis for REACH, for example, if it's sold in the EU, just to make sure that some of the restricted substances are not in the product. I mean, it's so common, it's just an example. But compliance might actually be quite expensive if you want no risk, right?
I know, 100%. It's kind of funny because our first ever, well, not our, but like my first product that we worked with SourceFinda was toys. PVC figurines for children
Yes.
between the age of 5 to 8, and this is also the product that your company inspected. And one of the things that we had to do was we had to get, because it was original design, it was the first time making the product, we had to get the paint, plastic, everything inspected to go to the standards of the Canada and the US. And it was every single paint color. And I think the first, I think the first product had like 3-4 different colors. So it was every single paint, every part, every plastic, or every different sort of plastic that was used. And I mean, it was not cheap. It was not cheap for the client to do. And then there was also the time constraints of, we're in the middle of production, because you have to take the product that's actual production, not prototype or sample. So that was that was a big thing. That was a big lesson for us as well, in letting people know that, hey, in terms of product compliance, like, you have to really make sure this is okay. And also they had feedback in terms of the actual toy, certain parts of the toy that maybe were a little bit too sharp or things like that, and
it could be broken. Now,
could be broken. Yeah.
Even this should be taken into account in the design phase, right? If something can be broken into a small part, especially if you don't, that can be swallowed by a small kid, and especially if you don't put very clear labeling that this is for kids of 7 or 8 year old, not like 2 years old. Then you can run into such big trouble when you put that on the market. So again, awareness of compliance standards, right?
So just one more thing about that, like we touched on packaging earlier. And packaging is another one of those things where people don't really think about it so deeply. But you have to make sure that your packaging is also follows the regulations, because shipping those toys to North America, and in the US, English was fine, but like in Canada, like, it's a requirement that it's French and English on the packaging. So these were subtle things that we had to make sure that the suppliers were aware of, to make sure that our packaging was compliant with the regulations in the countries that we're exporting to.
Absolutely. And it brings you back to the previous point that we made, is that it's your job as the buyer to know what is required and to document it in a very specific way and make sure that the supplier knows and does it, right? Don't count on the supplier to tell you that, oh, it's going to be in Canada. Okay, it's got to be also in French. No.
Yeah. That's the other aspect, is like, some people be like, oh yeah, I mean, the supplier should tell me. No. Like, you're the buyer. It's your product. Like, you're exporting it, so you need to know these things. And the information is out there if you do enough research.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, and then shipping and logistics, just to wrap up, a huge mess these days and not going away anytime soon. And I guess there's no real tips for a small buyer to go through that mess. I mean, just make sure that you specify proper protection for your products. That's something people often forget. And apart from that, find a freight forwarder or a consultant that can help you get the products shipped out to where you need them to be, right?
Yeah, I guess in terms of pricing, it's tough, but I think the normal sort of ideals are the same. Getting multiple prices from multiple shipping companies, and then being able to compare that. I think that's always good advice. But also just, not waiting, because I remember one situation that happened recently where we gave them a shipping quote, and then they said, oh, that's too high. Can we do this and that to change it? And then we waited a few weeks, and then the prices went up like almost 60%. So it was one of those things where it's like right now, if the price, if you can afford it, I would say you probably have to move quickly. But yeah, the biggest thing is just like try to get multiple quotes. Think about your packaging dimensions and things like that. Like if there's any way that you can make your packaging smaller, then that's going to help overall with the shipping process. But yeah, it's a tough situation. I mean, obviously, because of COVID, there's just less shipping options and things are just slower. So, but people still want their products, so it's much more expensive. And that's really nothing that we have control over. But yeah, I think that would be small pieces of advice I would give.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Not much to add, actually. Okay, well, thanks so much, Rico. Again, I think that's good condensed advice for people who want to start buying a product from Asia on a tight budget. Yeah, we'll link to the SFA Summit in the show notes. So again, it's sfadigitalsummit.com without any hyphen or anything. Yeah, cool. Well, thanks, Rico, and speak next time.
All right, thank you, Renaud. Always a pleasure to speak, and thanks for being on the summit and contributing your knowledge as well.
Cool. All right, yeah, happy to. Okay, speak to you next time. Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining us. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, don't forget to like and share, and you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all other places that you get your podcasts from. See you next time.